Today on the Building Men podcast, Ever Forward with Chase Chewning. A Virginia native and Army veteran, Chase is a Virginia Commonwealth University alum, graduating from their health, physical education, and exercise science undergraduate program in 2013. Having completed his MS in health promotion from American University in Washington, D.C., he also holds the following credentials: ACE certified health coach and TRX suspension trainer. Living a life of wellness has always been a part of him. Since growing up, eating fresh food from his grandparents' garden, playing baseball throughout school, and enjoying time in the mountains surrounding his family's Southwest Virginia home. After 6 years of active duty, Chase was medically discharged from the military due to a string of injuries that ultimately required him to have bilateral reconstructive hip surgeries. After learning how to walk again, twice, exercise, medicine, and healthy lifestyle modifications became his passion. Chase is the creator of Ever Forward Radio that helps people overcome obstacles in their life.
I think it's one of the most early imprints he put on me of this is what a man needs to be. He doesn't act out of violence unnecessarily. He doesn't raise his hand. He doesn't do all these things that traditionally other men might still do. But he is just communicative. He leads with, talking and de-escalating situations, and is always an example of love, especially in front of his family.
Welcome to the Building Men podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Meralda.
Welcome to the Building Men podcast. Become the strongest version of yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. What's up, brother?
How you doing?
So we have a guest on today that I did a deep dive into his world. I feel like I know him intimately, and I just met him about 3 minutes ago. I wanted to introduce the audience to Chase Chewning. Chase, welcome to the Building Men podcast, my friend.
My dudes, thank you so much for having me here. It's been a phenomenal 3 minutes so far. You guys are great. It's been great.
I wish I had $1 for every time I heard a woman say that to me.
Yeah, that's right. I know.
So, Chase Chewning, as I think about what a man looks like, if I were to build a man out of clay, then I feel like Chase
that's not a weird statement at all. I mean,
Chase would be the man that I would build out of.
Well, his voice alone speaks, thousands. So it's fantastic.
You would say that on the 2 days out of the year that I actually clean shave. I would have been a little bit more burly for that definition just an hour ago, but here we are.
So Chase is he's a coach caster, quote unquote. Basically, you're a strength and conditioning coach, you're a life coach, you're a podcaster, you're a podcast coach. You have an unbelievable journey that I've learned about. So is that how you would identify as a coach caster?
Yeah, somebody said that word, or it kind of came up, maybe about 2 years ago, and it kind of just stuck. It's definitely, I think, the best way to put both of my worlds, the worlds that I've been in the most, the last many years, in one little term. Yeah, coach caster. I think it's got a nice little ring to it. I don't know. Nobody else has taken it yet.
No, you should, that should be your patent. That should be, kind of what you go with. So, Chase, we did. In the brief introduction, I mentioned one of the things in Building Men that I'm really fascinated with are men who go through this hero's journey, that have gone through something really challenging in their life, that have picked themselves up from a challenging situation, even reinvent or rediscover themselves along this journey. And you've done that a couple different times in your life. I listened to a podcast that you did. It was called Lessons. No, it was. You did a podcast on leadership. You were basically doing a speech for military members around leadership. And it was such an interesting journey into your life listening to that podcast that you released on the Ever Forward podcast, which is, that's your baby, basically, the Ever Forward podcast.
Yeah.
So you did this thing about leadership, and you bring the audience into this journey, one with your father. So I wanted to start there, and I wanted to, if you could take us through your life up until that delineated time point of January 22nd of 2005, which is a really significant date in your life. I'm interested first in lessons you learned from your father and lessons you learned in school that helped you define what it meant to be a man up until that point. And then I'll pick back up around that time.
Yeah, really good question. And it's timely too. I think I was just recently talking with my wife about this, kind of just reminiscing some memories of my dad, particularly after he got out of the military. He was in the Army as well, and he just did whatever it took to be a contributing member of our community, to be a good husband, to be a good father, to be, a loving, caring person, friend to strangers. He just did whatever it took to do the right thing and to provide ultimately. And as a kid growing up, I more and more, now that I'm an adult and I look back on these things, I give credit to him and my stepmom and the whole just upbringing and how much they kept the struggle from us. You don't realize growing up that you are maybe, lower income, lower class. You don't have a whole lot, because I never felt like that. I only ever knew what it was to grow up in a loving family. I never wanted for anything. I had fun. I grew up in Southwest Virginia in the mountains, and I just felt like I had the best childhood, just running through the mountains and animals, and my brother and my sister, and just, we were loved, and my grandparents were there, and it was just like this mini little tribe. But looking back, I'm like, damn, like for many years, like I lived in a double wide. Many years, like my dad was, full-time active duty Army, and he was here and there and gone. But I never felt like that whole. And then I just think now I know, like as a 35-year-old man now, I know how hard it is just to adult. I know the struggles of just providing for your own self, but now being married myself, and wanting to just pour back into her and my community. Like I know how much that takes, and it ain't easy. And I can only imagine how much more difficult it was, 25, 30 years ago when he was doing it, without all the advancements of technology and smartphones and internet and all this stuff. He always made us feel loved. He always set a shining example, and he always just did whatever it took. And especially after he got out of the Army, he went through an injury as well and was medically discharged, just like me, which I'm sure we'll get into. And so he went through a couple of years of just jobs here and there, nothing super great to write home about, but it always provided for us. And then once he decided to kind of scratch that entrepreneur itch and get into business for himself, he opened up a coffee house that turned into like 4 or 5 coffee houses. We had a steakhouse back in my hometown. And just the example I saw was a leader who was not afraid to get his hands dirty and just did whatever it took to carry out the mission. And that was to open up the doors first thing in the morning. That was to close last at night. That was to, hire people. That was to be a leader, a manager. That was to put food on the table. And there's one example in particular, I think, when it comes to just really stands out to me from him beyond all that of what it means to be a man. And this is what I love what you guys are doing as well, is that it's kind of rewriting that masculine narrative, rewriting what it means, what it looks like, what it feels like to be a man. And his generation, and particularly the one before him, I think it was a very, very toxic one. It was a very, very disingenuous one, a harsh one, one that lacked emotional capabilities. And a lot of times, it looked very harsh. It looked violent sometimes. And there was a memory I was sharing with my wife actually just the other night of one of the most clear moments I can remember my father, whether he realized it or not, breaking that tradition and choosing to set an example and to rewrite that, hey, this is what a man does. This is what a man looks like. This is what a father does. This is what love looks like. My grandfather, loved the guy, wasn't the most emotionally available, was an alcoholic, and had a very, very hot temper. And I'll never forget this moment where I forget what it was. Me, my brother, my sister were all around, just being kids, probably annoyed him or something. And he kind of just blew up, and he began to discipline us. I'm sure, as you can imagine, an old white man in Southwest Virginia might do. And then my grandmother proceeded to try to get into the middle of it, and he wound up hitting her. And I just remember running out to the back of my house and back into like our little playground area, and just detach myself from the situation like my grandmother told me to do. And my dad came home. I didn't even know he was going to be coming home. He was still active duty, but he would come back and forth as much as he could. And he just saw his son just kind of like scared and semi-crying and just outside and just seemed off. And he asked me what happened, and I told him just what I told you guys. And I could see it in his eyes. And my father was a very loving, kind, caring man, but within a split second, you could see the fear of God. Like, he could put the fear of God in you. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he was an 11 Bravo infantry guy in the Army, just this big, rough, tough, burly guy. And so, like, I feared him, but I respected him and I loved him. And I could just see it in his eyes that he made a decision right then and there to not do what his father was doing, to not act out in violence, to not act out in yelling, screaming. He made a conscious decision while fighting through that anger and fighting through that frustration and fighting through, I'm sure, that sensation of breaking of trust. Like, hey, Dad, I left my kids here with you while I'm gone. You know, like, I wasn't expecting this. I'm sure there was a breaking of trust there. And I could see it kind of just go through his eyes and go through his head. And he went inside and in a matter of minutes, de-escalated the situation. And from that moment on, like, nothing like that ever happened again in my household. And it could have gone another direction. It could have been a violent one. But that, I think, is one of the most early imprints he put on me of this is what a man needs to be. He doesn't act out of violence unnecessarily. He doesn't raise his hand. He doesn't do all these things that traditionally other men might still do. But he is just communicative. He leads with, you know, talking and, you know, de-escalating situations, and is always an example of love, especially in front of his family.
And the fact that your father was able to do that growing up, I'm sure he was born in the 50s or 60s, and in that generation, to be able to show that level of vulnerability, it wasn't the norm. I know we'll talk. I mean, and the audience knows our situation with our father, and he didn't show any emotion really, and not until recently, right, that he started to show any level of emotion at all.
And that, so what I was going to say too is the amount of courage that it takes to tackle something that's so deep rooted in him, as far as your father goes, growing up with his father, and, you know, him seeing all this and instilling all this. That's very difficult to do, to all of a sudden make a change, like a hard stop at that moment, and know then and there that you're going to change. I mean, he has a lot of work and healing to do, but to be able to give you this life and all this love while also not being present for some of it is amazing. You know, I find that just to be that's so fantastic to hear, and it's so nice, you know. And
to be able to stand up to his old man, who I'm sure put the fear of God in him as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point.
And it gives us a deep dive into why you are the way you are. You mentioned that, you know, on one of the podcasts, that your father was your hero, and you mentioned look, sound, and feel, which as an educator, that's something that I would tell to my teachers. You know, as a principal, I would say you need to help kids understand what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it feels like to do whatever it is, whatever journey they're going on educationally. They need to understand, like almost visualize that. And you mentioned several different times that your father, it wasn't just what he said, it was what he did. He showed you the walk. So talk to us a little bit about what that means to you, your father showing you the walk.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, as a young child, as a teenager, we often just think it's the annoying parts of growing up. It's the things that our parents that are making us do, or like, I don't want to be here. This is boring. This is lame. But, you know, looking back, it's the example that he was setting, and it's the walk that he was walking. And I saw that really closely. I love how my father and I were able to share these moments together, because like you said, January 22nd, 2005 was actually the last day that we ever got to spend a moment with him. And him and I had a lot of unique time together. And how I saw him do that, how I saw him walk the walk, was I begrudgingly was one of his first employees in these coffee houses. It might have been some gray area with child labor laws. I don't know. But, you know, it's like, hey, this is what the family is doing. We're opening up these restaurants. I mean, before it was ever open, he and I were in there, and my little brother too. I was like 11, 12 years old, just with a crowbar and some power drills, just banging up some floor tile, tearing up the particle board in hopes we're finding some hardwood floor underneath for him to refinish, and hauling out trash and old appliances and getting this old location, ready for his new vision. And then that turned into many times going in just 0 dark 30 to open up the shop with him, like get in there like 4:30 a.m. to start baking the muffins and pastries and brewing the coffee and just getting the shop set up. And that was the work ethic that I saw as a teenager, and as the last thing I wanted to do, especially during my summer vacation. But, anyways, but that's what I saw. And I saw him during the process. It was very rough because he was gone almost I think I saw my dad less in the first probably 2 years of him being an entrepreneur than I did in the 6 years that he was in the Army, which is wild. But it's just, he was the first one in to open up the shop. He was always there if there was ever a problem. He was the last one closing it up. He was the one hiring people, training people. He was the one out there schmoozing and, interacting with, the customers in the neighborhood, and just walking the neighborhood and just introducing himself to every single person that he saw, and just give. So much so that my stepmom, who was like, hey, this is not how you run a business. You got to make money. We can't be giving all this shit away. But that's what I saw. Literally, I've seen my father give a homeless man the shirt off of his back. I've been in the car with him multiple times when we would drive home, and he would see the same guy walking the same path home who didn't have a car, walking from work to home, and we would pick him up and drive him home. The same guy who loaned out his brand new Dodge Ram pickup truck, the first 4-door Ram, this quad cab that they had in our area, in our town, to one of our employees whose van broke down from her church and was going on this youth group mission and was going to be awash because they didn't have any way to transport people. Just tossed her the keys, this brand new truck. And I just saw a man who showed up when he needed to show up and gave without ever wanting or expecting anything in return. And as a kid, I guess maybe I could have appreciated a lot of that, but you see somebody sometimes like, what about me? He's doing all this stuff for, other people. And it's kind of a hard concept to grasp, but he did his best to help explain that, because this is all for you. This is all for us. We're building a business, building a life here. We're growing ourselves into the community and becoming, more contributing to the community. We're getting to know everybody, because there's a time when we're going to need help from them and vice versa. And it was difficult. It was hard, but I mean, that was the walk that I saw him walk. And he never asked for anything in return. And it was all for us. It was all for the legacy and the life that he could provide for us. And specifically with me, like I said, we didn't come from money at all, but he found a way somehow to, I guess he saw a path I was going down in like 6th grade that him and my stepmom didn't really like. And, I guess you can tell as a parent. And so they pulled me out of that public school. We went to dinner and said, hey, Chase, next week you're changing schools. We're going to this private school over here. It's actually right across the street from our coffee shop. We're going to keep eyes on you. And I hated it at the time, but somehow he found a way to pay for me to go to this higher education experience, middle school and high school, and just gave me everything that he didn't have growing up. And the same thing came time when I was, graduating high school. It was, what do you want for your life? What can I provide for you? I was the first person ever in my family even considering going to college. And, again, I could see it in his eyes of just, this is going to be difficult. This is going to be hard. But, if this is the life that you need and the life that you want, and I can set you up for success, damn it, I'm going to find another way to provide for it. So it was just constant giving and constantly bringing it back home for the family.
I'm reading this book now, Chase. It's called Weapons of Mass Instruction, and it's by a guy named John Taylor Gatto. And the book is about, it's almost like turning the educational system on its head, really reimagining how education works. You mentioned this experience you had working for your father before you were probably legally able to. We went through the same thing. Our old man, he owns a painting business, and he's a blue collar, hardworking motherfucker who still gets up and he's still painting. He's 69 years old and he's still doing it right now. And we were working probably before we were able to work, but you learned such an amazing lesson doing that. I mean, there were so many life lessons that you learned outside of school. And I mentioned the book because they talk about reimagining when children or when young adults are able to start taking on more adult-like roles for themselves. So you were placed in a situation where you kind of had to learn on the fly watching your father do this. I'm wondering how much of your education, formal education in school, if you were to say, okay, where I am right now, I got 25% from my formal education, 75% from those hands-on experiences, or 50-50. I'm wondering how you would kind of quantify how much you got from the actual schooling experience versus those life lessons that your father taught you.
Yeah, what a great question. I'd say my formal education, middle school and high school, I probably have a leg up on other people who didn't have to go through all the classics like I did. I had to take Latin a couple of years. I had to read the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Divine Comedy, all of these like old world classics. So I might be able to reference a few more of those than the normal guy. But definitely that work ethic is something that really kind of rubbed off on me. I mean, I definitely picked up I'd say a fair amount of that from my time active duty in the Army as well, but it definitely shines through now that you're bringing it up. You know, I'm in year 4, going on year 5 of being self-employed, being an entrepreneur, and absolutely that's what you have to have. You have to just have whatever it takes. You have to do whatever it takes, and you have to just show up every damn day. And more importantly, you have to have a deeper reason attached to what you're doing. You have to have that fully solidified, unquestionable why. And if you can show up and do the work and be disciplined enough and have consistency be your best friend, well, that compounds into something long enough, I think. Of course, you need to kind of turn back and have these ROI measures. But yeah, the work ethic for sure. I mean, I can't think of a better example than him of just showing up, doing something, giving it your all, and wholeheartedly knowing that you left it all out there, but then also why you're doing it.
So I'm now fast forward to your father gives you this option. You're graduating from high school, and he says, son, you know, I want to be able to provide whatever experience you are interested in. And you decide to go into the armed forces at that point in your life. So talk to us a little bit about why you made that decision to do that, to serve our country. And then, you know, the curveball that was thrown to you with your father's illness during that time.
Yeah, so it was about like second half of the year, junior year, when I think that's about right, when you're supposed to be thinking about colleges and applications and touring campuses and whatnot. And I was doing that. I went to a very small private Christian school, like I said, and I only had, my graduating class was 6. So that, if that gives you an insight as to really how small it was. And so I had great relationships there. I had no hostility, no cliques. You know, I'm very grateful for the friends that I had in my grade there. And so I never felt that pressure that I think a lot of people might also feel in maybe larger schools or larger organizations of, I got to apply to this same school, or I got to apply to this level school, or I don't want to miss out on my friendships, so I'm just going to go here because they are. So it's kind of just going along the motions. You know, I trusted these people. I loved them. Went to some schools, started applying. But I'll never forget this moment where once it kind of became more serious, like, hey, these are deadlines. You got to apply. You got to get in. What happens if you get an acceptance letter? It became very real. Or it was time to be getting very real. And my dad, we were talking about a couple of different degrees in schools, and we had a conversation, and he more or less said something along the lines of, Chase, if you want to go to college, if this is what you want and you love it and you're sure about it, I'll find a way to make it happen. And I kind of interpreted that as like, I don't know how, like, I don't know where the money's going to come from. I'm not quite sure of the logistics, but again, he was willing to just commit and do whatever it took to give so that I could have more than him. Same thing with my brother and sister. And that kind of just struck me. I took it as, well, I'm not fully invested in college. I didn't have a degree or a concept, or honestly, I didn't even know what the hell I wanted to be when I grew up. I was looking into some graphic design programs. I've always been kind of creative. I have a lot of artists in my family. And so I was always, sketching, drawing, painting. And I was like, I guess I'll just do that. But after I kind of talked it through with him, and it was clear that I didn't have a solid idea of what I wanted to do or study, he was like, well, would you be interested in going to talk to a recruiter? Would you be interested in the military? He began to kind of just describe his experience more in detail with me now that I was, a 17-year-old young man. And, he was in the Army. My uncle was a Marine. My grandfather was in the Army. And, generation after generation, our family, pretty much, there's always been at least one person that served. And so that piqued my curiosity. And I said, yeah, sure. At first, he was like, you're too smart for the Army. Let's go look at the Air Force. And so we went to the Air Force office, and I met with a recruiter. Honestly, she couldn't have given two fucks if I was there. It was like, yeah, sure, take a pamphlet. If you want to come back, if you want to apply, sure. And I was like, well, this is the military, right? You would think you would want me a little bit more. Yeah. And she also couldn't really guarantee a job. And I was like, well, I'm not just going to sign my life away without really knowing what I'm going to do, because I'm not like a convict or something. I have options. I can pick a job here. And I'll never forget, my dad and I walked out of the Air Force office, the recruiter's office, and it was like a Joint Forces recruiting command center. And this Army guy walked out, Staff Sergeant Rue, and he was just so charismatic and nice, and was like, yo, I see you guys. Are you leaving? Are you done? Can I take you out to lunch? And long story short, he sold me on the Army. And he walked through a couple of programs, a couple of offers, needs of the Army at the time in the military intelligence community. And my dad was like, okay, all right. You're good for this. Because like I said, he was 11 Bravo. He's an infantry guy, a grunt. And he's like, the military has a lot to offer, but if you want to use if you want to go into the military, he was very clear and helped me realize from the beginning, make it work for you. He did it for different reasons. He joined the Army because, kind of my words, not his, we never got to have this conversation. He just kind of felt like he didn't have any other option. He needed to do something at the time that was going to provide regular pay, health care, benefits for his wife at the time, my biological mother, and his 3 young children. And that was really the only thing that he had. But then in that process, he loved it. He loved it. He lived it, breathed it, ate it. He absolutely just thrived in the military. And it really kind of broke his spirits a lot when he was injured and got out. Well, he was quite literally broken. He had a helicopter accident. He was a Persian Gulf vet and wound up rappelling out of a helicopter, and the chopper dropped, and like he went falling to the ground. Like he wound up having to have his lower part of his spine kind of rebuilt. He was medically discharged. So it really was just like a kind of like, all right, cool. My son not only wants to do this, but now he's going to do it because he wants to, and he's going to make it work for him. I got an amazing sign-up bonus. I mean, what 17-year-old isn't just going to see that $20,000 enlistment bonus check on top of free college, on top of all this stuff? And so that was very exciting, and I could see how it lit up my father. And I wanted to like keep him excited. It was never pressured. It was never forced. It was never like, hey, Chase, this is what Chewnings do, so this is what you're going to do. But I could just see how excited he was for this kind of legacy to carry on. And he knew how much he loved the military, and him and I are very similar. And he's like, Chase, you're just going to love it. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. And so I was like, cool. Well, this is exciting me more than something that might interest me in college. And I also know that this is going to be zero burden to my family, especially financially. So that was it. I enlisted Christmas break of my senior year of high school, swore in, and then I went in what's called this delayed entry program. It's like mini boot camp, sort of, kind of, not really, until I actually left for basic combat training.
And during that time, we were involved. There was a lot of conflict going on in the world at that time. It's still right now.
Yeah, this is 2003. This is the height of, wow, terrorism and OIF, all that. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just looking at it as I have a son who's 16 years old. And, I mean, the lessons that your father taught you, I want to write a letter to your father and just give it to you to read to him at one point. He was such an amazing masculine role model for you in so many ways. He said, I will provide this for you if that's where you want to go. But and then you were able to say to him, like, I want to do this not because I'm afraid, or I want to do this to honor you, but also not to put a burden on my family. So the lessons that were taught there, as far as masculine lessons, are just they're next level things. I just I hold your father in such a high regard based on this quick conversation here. So
Thank you.
Were you scared at that point? Like, I just think back, if my son told me that right now, I would be scared for him to tell me that, and then I know he would be scared as well. So how did you feel during that time?
It's weird. I don't know if I was just naive or just so entrusting to this new journey that my father presented to me. Like, why would he ever put me in harm's way? Yeah, honestly, I don't know. This was 2003. This was when we were literally dropping bombs over Baghdad, and it was wartime. And because I was actually a minor, you have to get parental consent. Both of your parents, if alive, have to sign this waiver. We actually had to do it, I think 2, if not even 3 times, at least twice. My mom, because every time we would go to sign it, she would just start crying and ruin the paperwork. She's like, I don't want my baby boy to go to war. I don't know. And, rightfully so. But I just kept telling her, and I kept telling myself and everybody, like, I'm going into a totally different job. I'm not going to be this, guy who's on the ground all the time. I'm not going to be the one knocking down doors. Little did I know at that time, that literally was everybody. So there definitely was some naivete going on there, but I had this wholehearted trust in my father that whatever he laid before me was going to be not only an option for me and one that I enjoyed, but how could I ever go wrong? How could I ever be put in harm's way? And so I think I was just so caught up in the excitement. And once I began to kind of share it publicly with my school and my community, nobody else was really doing that. Nobody else in my school, all 5 other people in my graduating class, nobody else was enlisting. Nobody else was going into a military academy. I was the first person, that I can think of in our entire community that any of us really knew or engaged with that was signing up. And so you can imagine, in the South of Virginia, everybody got behind it. It was, just support and morale and like, good job, son. And so I felt loved and supported from the get-go. And I don't know. I just signed the papers. I committed. I went in, and I was so excited about. I went into linguistics, which is really ironic because I sucked so bad in language. I had to take like Spanish summer school basically. But again, they dangle $20,000 in front of you. You'll like, hey, I'll learn a language. And so, I went in, I loved the job. It was super cool. And it was just so unique. It was kind of like the super secret squirrel, spy stuff that you see in like the cool movies, and, to some degree, not really, but, and then the real reality of it all hit me once I got into the real world, the real army. I never really felt like I would be going into anything other than what, my father wanted for me.
And so now you're in active duty, and you find out this horrible news about your father. Walk us through a little bit what that was like at that time when you heard this is the man who was your hero, when you find out that he has ALS. What was that like going through that journey?
Yeah, so how it first started was in boot camp. We get letters from friends and family, and the ones from my dad kind of became less often. He was the one writing me the most from the very beginning, because he went through it all. He knew exactly, depending on which day, which week, most likely what I was doing. And so he was kind of like, hey, I've been through this, here's what you're going to experience, kind of thing. And then those began to become a little bit less and less. And then my stepmom was writing kind of on his behalf. And then it was like, oh, something's come up with your dad. We got to go to this doctor, this thing. And I always just kind of assumed it was related to his previous injury. Like I said, his back, because he had to frequently go in for checkups with that. And he had like hardware put into his spine. So I'm like, oh, sure, it makes sense. He's got to go get stuff checked out. And once the ambiguity kind of set in of, some weird stuff's going on, we don't know, outside of that old injury, it was kind of just, I don't know. All right, well, just keep me posted. And unbeknownst to me at the time, he found out that he was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. He was diagnosed terminal. And he didn't share that information with me and my brother and my sister and really the rest of my family outside of him and my stepmom. It wasn't a few months later until I got done with boot camp and I was transitioned into my technical school, basically. And I was able to come home for my first time. This was maybe like 6 months later. It was Christmas break, 2003, going into 2004. And we decided he's going to take the whole family. We're going to do a big New York City Christmas trip. So we went up for like 3-4 days and just had an amazing time. It was very rare for all of us to kind of come together as a family like that and really do a trip. And then at the end of that experience, he shared it with us. Hey, here's what's going on. Because he'd begun to already like kind of slur his words a little bit. Swallowing was becoming a little difficult and he was just off. And it was very noticeable. He was always this larger than life guy, talking, laughing, moving, and he wasn't anymore. And so once he kind of shared that information with me, at first I didn't really process it until I got back to my unit back in, I was in Monterey, California at the time at this language academy. And maybe just a couple of days later, it all hit me and the seriousness of it. I realized that this isn't just something that like he's sick and he's working through. Like, no, this is literally just counting down his days. And it completely wrecked my life. It just completely sent me spiraling, so much so that I tried to get out of the Army. There's a hardship clause in the military that if you can prove basically your family needs are greater right now for literally their livelihood, financial support, whatever, you can get out of your contract. And so I began that paperwork. I began my process just quite literally the first 6 months as I was beginning my career. I was ready to end it, ready to give it up and go back home. And my dad found out and he tried to talk me out of it over the phone. He couldn't. Next thing I knew, he was on a plane, I think like literally the next day, flew out to see me in California and spent about 4 days. Him and I, he got this hotel room off base. We went and just did what we always did. We just went to coffee houses. We walked around. We drove to San Francisco. We went to Pebble Beach and we just, had, I think, decades worth of father-son time boiled down to 4 years because he was already on a cane at this point. It was very difficult for him to talk and move. And I mean, looking back, this was a painful process for him, but it was so important for him to tell me these things and to show me that, like, Chase, my journey is ending. Yours just began. Mine ending doesn't need to be the end of yours as well. And he convinced me otherwise. He talked me out of abandoning it. He, again, just like my decision to join the military, it wasn't, hey, you're going to do this because this is what we do. It also wasn't like, you're not going to quit just because I'm saying not to quit. He wanted to hear me. He wanted to talk with me. He wanted us to have that time to just really, for me to hear it myself, that I'm choosing to stay in, I'm choosing to persevere, I'm choosing to continue to walk the walk. Just because something like this is happening, it shouldn't be the end all be all for my journey. And we left it as, all right, I'm going to stay in. He flew back home. And very rapidly after that, things began to just get worse. He became pretty much bedridden at home. He was in a motorized, wheelchair scooter thing. And then just a couple months after that, we had to put him in the hospital for terminal care for the next, few months after he was alive. From diagnosis to when he passed, it was about just shy of 18 months. It's a very escalated case.
One thing that I find really interesting as well is as people go through these life-changing experiences, I've recognized seeing people that have rebuilt themselves from these experiences. You went through this, you buried your hero. You said that on a couple different podcasts. You buried your hero. If you had an opportunity to go back to that moment, I'm almost thinking, would you change the trajectory of your life, or did that experience make you the man you are today?
Absolutely. We only know this in hindsight, right? I am now at a place in my life, and the grief and the process and the loss of all that. It's been 16 years. I am in a place of gratitude for his loss. And that whole experience, I will never, ever forget. Like you said, I quite literally I thought buried a part of me when he had a military ceremony, military tribute there for his funeral. And I'll never forget the playing of taps and the 21 gun salute and the folding of the flag over his coffin, passing to my stepmom to my left and my best friend Katie to my right, and just the swarm of people in that place. Even leading up to that, it was just as far back as I can remember, looking in the back of the hearse or the limo that we were in, from the funeral home to the gravesite, I could not see the end of the line of people that came out to show the love and support for my father. Nurses that worked for him one shift in the VA hospital. He just left, even in a vegetative state, more or less. He left such an impression on everybody that he came in contact with that at his funeral, they had to come out and support that. And at the end of it all, I was the last person over his grave, and the flag had been given to my mother, and everybody was walking back, and the guy or the guys were there with their shovels to finish doing their job. And I dropped one final rose down into the hole in the ground, and I said goodbye. And I thought I was saying goodbye to a part of myself there as well. And that was probably, I'll say, one of the biggest lies or the biggest inconveniences that I told myself for the next decade, really, was that a part of you died, a part of your life was over. You're never going to come back from this. But truly, it was a rebirth. And I only can say this now because of the 10, 12 years later, before I ever got to a point where I could even talk about this again. Now it's been 16 years since he passed. But that gave me purpose. It gave me meaning. It truly is the reason for everything that I'm doing right here, right now. I mean, these two words that are above me, that are, my brand and my mission and, my tattoo, it was something that he said growing up. It's something that I witnessed in him my entire life. And even quite literally to his last dying breath, these were the words, this was the mantra that he wanted to leave behind. And it was in that moment where that became a reality. And so what I thought was death was actually a rebirth for me. And I am totally in a place of gratitude for this mission, for this mantra, for this philosophy, for this mindset, for this way of living that he not only demonstrated to me, but I think passed off to me, unfortunately, through a sacrifice, through a deed such as his death. I wouldn't change a damn thing. I can't imagine my life any different. Of course, my family, we would love to have him here with us, but none of us would be here doing what we're doing now, I think, if we're not for that tragedy.
And he lives on. That ever forward mantra, that idea is living on through every single interaction that you are having. I mean, I could speak for myself. Listening to your podcast, listening to what you are doing, your father's words are speaking to you, to me, through you, now to my audience. So there's that ripple effect that he has created. And I just wanted to acknowledge you, and I want to appreciate, what you just went through to tell that story. I know that that's a deep dive into everything that's going on, and to have those couple months with your father and, the experiences that you had, and to have the courage to say that experience made you who you are today. It's not looking back, like you just said, throwing that last rose onto the coffin. At the time you were thinking, what was me? Now you're thinking that experience helped me help so many millions of people right now. And it takes a lot of courage to even acknowledge that, kind of manifesting itself in your experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, man. Thank you.
And the ever forward, it's not just a tattoo. It's not just a radio. It's not just a banner on the wall. It is how you live your life. From the lessons that your father taught you, it's taking that difficult situation, not letting it drag you down, helping it push you or propel you forward. So now after this experience, you have a couple days, and now you got to head back. got to head back into the
Yeah.
military. They need you there. So talk to us a little bit about that transition, going back into the military now, and from that point until, you had that, difficult physical situation that you went through.
Yeah, so quite literally, I think I had like 3 days after his funeral. I was on emergency leave, which is basically meant like I tapped out of all my PTO and I was in the hole now a couple weeks. I was so grateful that I was able to go home. I was with my father and my family for his literal last like 2 weeks that he was alive. I was with him during his last few breaths. So I had to go back to being a soldier. And that definitely, whether it was just my circumstances or convenience, it allowed me the opportunity. And I also think because of the nature of my job, what I was doing with my life at the time, I didn't have the luxury. I didn't have the opportunity for properly grieving. I can honestly say, my character back then was to also just suppress everything, to just stuff it down. But in my line of work at the time, letting your emotions get the better of you quite literally could be life or death. It could be the meaning of life and death for you, life and death for other people. Again, this was 2005. We were still very much a nation at war. And I kind of chose, I guess, to turn that off. And, I would have moments here and there when I would come home, or it would be his anniversary, and I would have, my sad moments that I thought were, hey, this is just normal. Yeah, of course, a 20-something guy is going to cry about his father every once in a while, but it should have been way more often. It should have been more immediate. It should have been tears sooner. It should have been therapy sooner. It should have been talking to my family, my friends sooner, and it should have been much more consistent and longer. But I didn't have that luxury, or I chose to not have that luxury at the time. And so it just became such a festering internal wound and just kind of hidden depression and thing that I was struggling with, that I was struggling by myself with, that I was just like, it's got to come out somehow. And I began to seek some opportunities to just let it out, to vent, and to just, violently give myself these opportunities for the grief to be deadened, to be dulled, and possibly, if that meant the death of me, like I didn't care. And so I began to volunteer for some deployments. I was a Russian linguist, and that was my mission for several years. And I wanted to volunteer my services just as soldier Chase, work, in the intelligence community, but just, outside of my normal day to day. So I began to apply for some deployments. The first one was looking very promising. They really liked me and my skill set, but they wanted somebody just one grade above me, one rank above me. And they held out as long as they could, and they got some guy at the last minute. That one fell through. So then I took note. I was like, all right, if me going down range, getting in harm's way to deaden this pain, to numb this pain, means being a higher rank, gotcha. Loud and clear, I hear you. So I worked my ass off for about the next year, went through every promotion board that I could, got every promotion point that I could. I escalated quickly up the ranks, found another opportunity, was looking more promising. I was put on a war game training to be even, more considered for deployment. And just a few days into this war game, I was leading an ambush with my team against, we call it the Op 4, the opposing force, the fake enemy. And it was in some, desert terrain and somewhere in the mountain desert area of Texas. And I was leading the assault, and I'll never forget what I thought. It was, not a live fire operation, but I thought somebody shot me. As fast as I popped up and I was leading this ambush, I went down even faster. And I heard and felt this large and sharp, loud pain, this pop, and I immediately came dropping to the ground. I was in all my, I had my weapon, my body armor, my rucksack, all this stuff. And I thought I got shot. And I was just crying out in this immense pain. I wound up getting medevaced out of that situation, taken to the base hospital. Turns out I suffered just major trauma to my L4, L5 vertebrae. Basically, part of my spine wanted to go one way, the rest of my spine was going another way. A lot of trauma immediately to my hips, my gait area, and I tore my hamstring. And so that pulled me out of that deployment opportunity. And it was so much so, and the injuries were so severe and were not healing. And I kept trying to force rehab and force healing, wound up re-injuring myself, and things got so much worse. Not only did I become non-deployable, so my thoughts of going down range and coming home in a box to just get rid of this pain and to give $400,000 life insurance to my family went away very fast. And they're like, hey, we're going to remove you. We're taking you out of your job entirely, removing you from this base. We're sending you down to this medical hold unit, and you're going to go under the knife. And basically what happened was I had to have my femurs completely reconstructed. I was just at a point where my pain in daily living was just so bad. And like I said, they deemed me non-deployable, which is like a death sentence in the military. It's pretty much only a matter of time before they're going to medically discharge you. And so for the next almost a year and a half, almost 15 or so months, I was a patient. I went into the hospital. From like the top of my femur almost to the top of my glute on my right side, they cut me open, surgically dislocated, removed my femur, reshaped it, put it back in, clean up my joint, put 2 rods in the top of my newly shaped femur. And then I'm in the hospital for several days. I'm at home for weeks, bed rest. And then I'm completely reliant on other people, nurses, at-home care. I had a girlfriend there living with me at the time, and I had to be bathed, wiped, transported for weeks, even a few months, until I could get up to a point of using a walker or a cane to then go to physical therapy and rehab to learn how to walk again. And I did that for about 8 or 9 months. And once I was at a point to where I was upright and I could load bear enough just standing and walking on my own, they're like, okay, cool, Sergeant Chewning, now we're going to go back into the other side. So it was like wash, rinse, repeat. And so I went back and I did my left side. And yeah, I was like, fuck, I got to do this all over again. And that one was even a little bit worse because at home on bed rest for that one, I'll never forget, I was laying on the couch, and I just ever so slightly moved, try to just grab my leg and move it, because I physically, I couldn't just tell my brain to move my leg. And it just moved the wrong way, and I retore a labrum there, and basically kind of a couple of the pins just moved where they shouldn't, and put me back in the hospital. And my rehab with that one was just far worse, far more intense. And so that was my life for another like 8 months after that.
And I think about after you go back into the military, you're on this mission basically where I'm commando. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to deal with my repressed pain through action in service. And if I die, fuck it. That was meant to be for me at that time, to where the pendulum swings all the way in the other direction, where now you're totally relying on other people to do anything for every life function now. So when you think about that pendulum and how it relates to masculinity from one end of repression all the way to this total vulnerability that you were experiencing, that must have been a total mind fuck for you in a short period of time.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said, man. It's I am man, hear me roar. I am a soldier. I'm a warrior. I am going to go down in a blaze of glory, or at least, that's what I was thinking at the time. I'm gonna be this man that I think I'm supposed to be. I'm gonna be this soldier. I'm gonna do what I think I'm supposed to do. And yeah, whatever happens, fuck it. Like I literally just didn't care. And I also knew, like we were talking about earlier, if that were to happen, I was going to be providing for my family. A big incentive for me at the time to, like, what kind of pushed me over the edge to try to pursue these options was I was doing one year what's called our birthday month checklist. And every year it's kind of like a logistical physical. Instead of going to your doctor, we have to go and like update all of our records and our it's called SGLI, or life insurance, and all these things. And they upped it from, I think it was like 250K to 400K. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in that office. I was at the base in Fort Sam, Houston, Texas. And the sergeant in front of me said that, and this light bulb went off in me. And I was like, wow, that is a lot of money. And my family could really use that. I didn't know what was left over after the funeral. I didn't know the costs. I knew my stepmom was now alone. I knew there was costs associated with my grandmother, my father's mother, who was living with my stepmom at the time, and my younger brother and younger sister, and everybody else just came pouring in. And selfishly, I thought that $400,000 would solve everybody's problems and wouldn't cause more problems if, now they lost their son, now if they lost their brother. And and it was the complete opposite. I went from thinking I was going to be the warrior on the battlefield to quite literally being just completely useless for a year and a half and needing help with everything from everybody.
It's a wonderful life. You were George Bailey. You were on the bridge thinking, my life I'm worth more dead than I am alive. And to go through that as a 25-year-old, around
23 when I suffered those injuries, or like 21, 22 even, maybe.
To think that you were already thinking about providing for your family, a lesson that you obviously learned from your father at a younger point in your life, that he was willing to do all these things and work long hours and be to provide. So that was such a lesson there. So now you're going through this rehab. What was it? I mean, a lot of people would have cashed their chips in at that point and said, you know what, I'm just going to kind of fade away here. You didn't. I'm sure you went through some depressive times where what is it all about? Why am I here? As you were going through that vulnerable state, what was it that pulled you out of that you said, you know what, I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to move forward. I'm going the ever forward mantra. How did that reintroduce itself into your life at that point?
Yeah, I'll always say that what I went through sucked. It really, really did. It sucked hard, and I hated it, and I was miserable, and it was a total identity change for me, a radical, almost overnight identity change, because being in the military, I think, is one of the most active jobs you could ever have. And before that, I grew up in the mountains on hundreds of acres of my family's land, of just running, playing, building forts, pretending to be an Army guy. I played baseball and sports my whole life, and I never knew anything other than being active. I never knew anything other than living a quality life, moving freely, eating well, and just feeling like fucking Superman. Of course, at 20 years old, everybody feels like that. You got all the youth and the hormones in your favor. But I give a lot of credit to the unfortunate situations of others that I shared during that 15, 18 months, that year and a half. So like I said, I was in a medical hold unit. I wasn't in a regular Army unit anymore. My only job, the only job of all the soldiers in this unit, were to heal, were to recover, were to go to therapy, go to surgeries, ambulatory care, prosthetics, burn victims. When I was in formation, when I was going, because like I said, there were weeks before any going back to base where I was just bed rest at home, just immobilized. Transportation would pick me up. I would get dropped off in the parking lot. They would get my wheelchair down. I would wheel up to formation, or if I was on a walker or a cane at the time, and I would go up to these guys and these girls, and they were just unrecognizable. Like head to toe burn victims, multiple arms and limbs missing. And it just showed me that, like, Chase, this could have been your life. I literally saw what could have happened if I didn't completely go through with it. They were coming back from theater, unrecognizable as human beings, and having their dreams and life just taken away from them. And what I went through sucked, like I said, it really did. It showed me that wasn't my path. This was not meant for me. So quit complaining. Like, do something about it. You've been given an opportunity here. You've been literally quite given the gift of time. You have nothing else to do other than heal, other than learn the body, learn what is going on inside and out, develop an appreciation for this second chance you've been given because of the path that I was choosing for myself. My dad, God, the universe, whatever, quite literally snapped me up out of that moment and had to physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually break me so that I could be shown what I was meant to do, what I was meant for, what my father wanted for me truly. And so I would just look around, and there were a lot of disgruntled people there, you can imagine, in those physical and mental states, but there were so many other people that they had a better attitude about their life than I did. They were cracking jokes, and they were talking about what they were doing on the weekend and, life after the military. And they were already future thinking, whether it was all bullshit, whether it was false motivation or not, like it left an imprint on me. And I just realized that all right, fine. Like, I tried my best. This is not working out how I thought. And so I began to just maximize my downtime. All I had was time. If I wasn't, in physical therapy or rehab or pool therapy or whatever, I was just laying in bed at home. I was at home doing nothing. So I began to study anatomy, physiology, nutrition. I began to read books. I began to scour the internet. I began to just, in a way, it definitely was a way for me to reinstate control over my life, because all bodily functions, more or less, I mean, I had no control over my daily living, what I could do, but I could, I can learn how, to eat certain foods that are going to help reduce inflammation and promote healing in the body. I can support gut health, brain health. I can learn about different exercise techniques and isometrics and things that I can, work on with the rest of my body while maybe the lower half of my body is completely out of commission. And I became fascinated and just obsessed, really. And I was downloading everything I could download and watching YouTube videos, and I even began to take some online courses and get enrolled in school. I completed my associate's degree, and I began to just really understand the human body in a way that I never had before. I just took it for granted before. I think a lot of people, you show up, you move, you act, you play sports, you whatever. But when that's taken away from you, you don't realize what a gift movement is. You don't realize what a gift sleeping through the night is. You don't realize. That was another thing too. I didn't mention my journey was, you can imagine the level of pain that I was in. I didn't know. I became hooked on painkillers. I was on narcotic pain medication for months and months and months after my surgery. So much so that it would get, night terrors. I would, like sleepwalk, night walk. I would have these out of body experiences. And so much so one time they gave me a seizure. I knocked myself unconscious and gave myself a traumatic brain injury, a mild TBI, sent me back in the hospital. And so brain health and everything became a big interest to me. And so I just poured my everything into that, because I knew there was going to come a day pretty quickly where the Army's like, okay, Chase, you're upright and mobile again. So you're done, you're out. And so they medically retired me, actually, 23 years old. They sent me packing, and I began my new life about 3 weeks later. I was enrolled in school back in home state of Virginia in an exercise science program. Shout out mom. My mom lived in Richmond at the time, and I was still on a cane. I was this 23-year-old kid on a cane who had to have his mom come help him walk around campus to sign up for classes and get enrolled and all that stuff and tour the facility. And I just poured my life into it. And I realized that there were a lot of things that I could do for my mind and my body to not have to settle for this new definition of a man, of a professional, of a human being. I wasn't going to accept, and also kind of seeing how much this disease affected my father, almost to the level of, almost an unhealthy level, I'll say, of I'm going to be all the health. I'm going to be just obsessed with everything, what I eat, what I do, so that never happens to me as much as I can thwart it. But it just became my new obsession, and I loved it. And I reached a level of rehabilitation pretty quickly. And, years later, I'm able to get back into the gym and do all these things. And then it just became my my obsession and my new profession. And that's what I chose to do with my life after the military, and just not waste the kind of second chance I was given.
The community that was established during that time, and one, I want to thank you for, sharing that emotional experience, being in that rehab facility. It was a community. You were with a community of individuals that were going through not the same thing, but where they thought their life was heading in one direction. The carpet was pulled out from under them, and they had to reinvent. And having that,
quite literally fight for their lives. So many of them every day.
And what an unbelievable experience to be a part of a community where they weren't saying, like you mentioned, some of them, it might have been, they needed to just have that daily affirmation, but a lot of them were in this spot where like, yeah, I'm going to get through this. And it was, again, going back to the ever forward. So while it was the mantra when your father was going through ALS, that ever forward mantra came back into your life during that time, and it helped to springboard you on that journey that you were going into physical fitness and understanding your health.
Yeah, I think so. I didn't really know it fully at the time. I was so hell-bent on just running away still from that trauma and that loss, and just running away from that life of being disabled, of being dependent on other people for everything. Because I went through that on my own, in my own version, on my own level, but I had witnessed the extremity of it with my father. And I was like, I'm going to do everything I can in my power to never go through that again. I'm never going to, as much as possible, have anybody else rely on me. Again, probably still working through my own definition of the masculine, of, I'm supposed to provide, I'm supposed to be, do, act, look like all these certain ways. But it also was just for myself, because I'd gone through the broken shit, and that stuff sucks, and I never want to do that again. And so it became very clear to me that with intention, with a whole heart and education and just commitment and consistency, the body wants to survive. The body wants to thrive. And if you help build up those conditions around it, it is capable of extraordinary things. Within the few short years after the military, I was out, like, I should not have been doing some of the things that I was doing, probably. Hell, maybe even now. But the body is meant to just move and thrive, and that's what it wants to do, and that's what I want to do, and then I'm going to support it until the day I die.
And I think what I hear you saying, Chase, is that one of the big transformations for you came from running away from the pain into focusing on it and running into it and running through it. You were like, fuck it, the only way I'm going to fully get through this is if I run through the pain instead of running away from it.
Yeah, like I said, I did all the physical stuff for years, and I got really good at it. I was getting stronger, getting leaner, getting healthier. I was in my career as a clinical health coach and trainer. But it was about a decade of that. It was about a decade of the physical self. And I was still ignoring so much of that loss and that trauma, not only of my father, but like my own identity, my own emotional life. The life that I wanted for myself did not happen. And I went through so much. Like, that leaves an imprint on the mind and in the body. My physical health was great. My mental and emotional health was shit. I began to have manifestations of PTSD, panic attacks, anxiety. I couldn't go out to the movies anymore with friends, family, my girlfriend at the time, or even at home. Anything that resembled death, anything that was military related, anything that was, a hospital scene where somebody dies, or even hearing the word terminal, cancer, anything would just be a trigger for me. And I would just have these episodes, panic attacks. I became no fun to be around in the movie theater. I became unsafe, to drive, hearing certain music. At home, my girlfriend then, my now wife, I'll never forget, we were watching this movie one time, and it was a death scene. And like they do in a lot, someone's on like the gurney or the hospital bed, and they bring the sheet up over the body. And I was reliving the death of my father. And I probably had one of the most severe panic attacks in my life, just unconsolable. And she was like, "Hey, I love you. Like, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, but this is becoming a pattern and it's getting worse. And if you don't work on this the way that you're working on everything else, we have a problem. You have a problem. Like, this isn't going away. And so it became very clear to me that no matter how much I rehabilitated myself, no matter how much stronger I got, or whatever the exterior self looked like, however much change I could give there, the inside was still radically broken and a mess. And so that's when I had to make the shift to run to the problem. And I made this conscious decision to, well, the thing that's caused me the most pain, I wonder if I kind of just like ran towards it instead of running away from it, what would that look like? Because that's what I did with the physical self. Like, my areas of injury, my body was broken. So let me go treat the body. Let me run to the body. So I began to finally just revisit all of that. I started just pouring my heart, my soul out into journals and brain dumping, and just, going back to therapy and just working on my mental health, my emotional health, and finally giving that an opportunity to catch up to all the physical stuff. And then that completely changed the trajectory of my life. I was able to, it took years, but to work through reducing those panic attacks, being able to sit through a death scene, being able to talk about any of this without completely breaking down. I got a lot of my life back, and I got that relationship back. We wound up being fine. I got married, and she's here in the room with me now. And, and it's amazing. And so the body can go through a lot, and the mind and the soul can go through a lot. And it's often the first part. It's often just the body that we focus on, because that's the thing we think needs the most attention, especially as men. That's why we go to the gym. A lot of us, we don't realize it. That's why we need to think we need to look a certain way, feel a certain way. There's a deeper rooted, usually kind of emotional connection that we're lagging. And I actually had a realization about this late last summer, of not only so the deadlift, right, has become something that I love to do the most. And it's one that makes me feel the most empowered back in my body, because when you think about it, it's engaging the hips so much. And that's my weakest point. That's my most broken point. And I should not be able to do a lot of things I'm able to do. I'm no world record holder, but I've repped out 420 pounds for a few on the deadlift, and somebody like with bionic hips like me, that's pretty fucking cool. I'm super happy with it. But what I realized the most was why that movement is actually so important to me is it's an emotional rooted reason. One time I was home from active duty before my father passed away. I was visiting that same friend I mentioned during my father's funeral, my friend Katie, my best friend from high school. I was visiting her and her family just down the road from my house. I got a call from my stepmom. Hey, can you come home? I need help with your dad. I was like, what happened? He fell and I can't get him up. So I went home, and racing home, thinking the worst, open up the house door, go inside. And my stepmom was trying to help him out of the chair into the shower or something, or he fell out of the chair. And with ALS, you have no control over your muscles. You can't do anything. The mind is completely there. So he's completely cognizant and aware the whole time, but just you're a prisoner in your own body. And I remember I was 20 years old. No, I was 18, 19. Yeah, because 19 when he passed, maybe 19 years old, and thinking that I'm this, now this big, tough Army guy. I'd been in for a year. I can do anything, right? I couldn't even lift up my own father off the ground. No matter how much weight I could put on my back, no matter how many miles I could ruck, no matter whatever I could do as a soldier, it all meant shit. Because I couldn't pick up my own hero. I couldn't lift my own father off of the ground. We had to get more people to help us to do this. And I traced this back to really, that's why deadlifting is so important to me. That's why knowing that I can lift X amount of weight off the ground is so important to me, because in that moment, I was like, I will never not be able to do this again. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity. Luckily my dad never fell out again, but he passed away shortly after that. And I was never able to kind of prove that against myself. But and so I just began to unravel, and as much pain as that caused me and unraveling to getting to these root causes of things and revisiting this trauma and just letting it all out, it has just led to the most immense healing and opportunity and clarity in my life. And looking good is one thing, but feeling good, like to your soul, to your heart, and being able to just live every day, showing up for your family, your partners, your community, yourself, with that kind of security is priceless. And it takes constant work. I'd say it takes more work than the frequency maybe you go to the gym, but it is so profound. And so by fully running back towards that pain, I just embraced it, and I brought it with me, and I've brought it with me every day. And it doesn't ever get easy, but just easier. And that's probably the greatest lesson, longest lasting lesson my dad has ever given me.
I'm going to take a journey to get back to this question here. One of the podcasts you did about leadership, one point you hammer home was about that N1, that experimental group of one, and you talk about Jocko. I mean, we talk a lot about Jocko Willink and extreme ownership and how important it is to look internally first. Just the juxtaposition of that idea, the N1, you need to look inside first. But during the course of our time together, Chase, one thing that's been really apparent to me on the ever forward journey is while you were able to look inside, it was you got a lot of motivation from these outside sources along your journey, from your dad, from your stepmom, from the military, from being in that rehab space, and then your wife May, her conversation with you was that was the catalyst for you to really look deep inside and go through that emotional journey. So a lot of the ever forward, while it's just the juxtaposition between the N1, but also being really relying on those other people to help motivate other people. And May, I would love to have her on the podcast. We would love to have her on the podcast as well. We listen to her when she's on with you. I mean, what a cool dynamic the two of you do.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the best. I enjoy those a lot.
So just when you think about that idea of looking inside in that N1, versus having the vulnerability to allow someone else to have such an integral impact in your life, how would you? I don't know. As I'm trying to think about the way to ask this question, it's like the dichotomy between the two.
It's you have to have that constant with yourself. It's you and you every day. It's not you versus you. It is you and you every single day. But in doing so, you're going to realize either immediately or over months and years what you need to make better in your life. You cannot provide. You cannot fully provide. You have to have that community. You have to have that support system. If I'm understanding kind of think where you were going with this is, it is you that N equals one, the study of one all the time, because you should choose to show up for yourself. You should choose to try to understand what your body is telling you, whether that's through biofeedback, whether it's through breath work, altered states of consciousness, old trauma, how did you sleep? Your body, you are always going to be in communication with yourself if you just stop long enough to listen and figure that out. But in doing so, like I said, it is going to show you things. You're going to realize things that you will need support with. You will need that confidant. You will need that colleague. You will need that partner, that wife, that husband, that friend. You absolutely have to have community along the way. And that is something that, I might be a little biased. I'm from the military where there's no lone ranger really anymore. It's you have your team, you have a support system, but just, also my father, that's been imprinted on me. While, he was gone in the military doing his thing to provide for his family, that could have very easily been a selfish realization of, look at me, look at what I'm doing. I'm providing. I'm this Army guy. I'm the one doing all this stuff. But he would have been jack shit if it wasn't for my stepmom and my grandmother and my grandfather back home watching the kids and getting us to school and doing all these things. you can be so good on your own, but if you want to be great, you have to have meaningful relationships, meaningful communities that you pour into and that you receive from along the way. So much so, like, it's become, so still big into like tracking. I got my Apple Watch, my Whoop device right here. I have lately been able to put a quantitative number to how good my body feels, where I am in terms of recovery, my heart rate variability, my resting heart rate, my overall recovery rate, when I am with those people that matter most to me. Hands down, every single freaking time lately, when I stop focusing on myself and I listen to the needs of other people, I spend quality time with my wife, I'm in a state of play with my friends, I'm in meaningful relationships, I'm having deep conversations, or even just fun conversations about what is going on in other people's lives and what we can do to support each other. I have my highest biomarkers to date. I can do anything and everything else to try to manipulate those numbers by myself. But until I put myself in the environment of other people, my body is like, no, like, we need more. Community absolutely must accompany the N=1 journey. You're gonna reach a limit sooner than later. I promise you, it's gonna happen.
And it's the idea of oxytocin, that hormone that you need by having that close human connection with other people. Along your journey, Chase, what you did, I wrote down for some reason as I was listening the term knowledge quilt. It was almost like you were kind of patching together all these different things on your journey that you're like, you know what, let me take this idea here and I'm going to stitch this in, and I kind of like this and this makes sense to me. You didn't just follow along in one specific philosophy. You patched together this idea of what it meant ever forward, what it was going to look like, sound like, feel like, to bring that turn back full circle. And when you think about fast forward to from that date, January 22nd, 2005 up to January 22nd, 2017, when you did your first ever forward podcast, that kind of quilt that you developed to get to that point, you were able to start this idea of, you know what, I went through this whole journey. I went through all this shit, these different experiences. I'm going to take this and I'm going to help other people now. So you reinvented yourself again after those 10 years where you're, understanding health and exercise science and your physicality and how that meant, or what that meant to you. Now you're taking it and you're moving it forward. You're pushing it ever forward. So talk to us now about, okay, we're on that date, the first day of your podcast. What is that, your journey, moving forward? What is that going to look like, sound like, feel like at that date in your life?
So that was a really pivotal moment in my personal life, and looking back now, I guess you could say my professional life. That was when I was realizing the power and necessity of, okay, not only, all right, Chase, you went to therapy. Okay, not only you talked about your feelings, but it's not over. Like, the necessity for this to continue in order for you to heal and to live the life that you want. And so while, yes, I decided to launch Ever Forward Radio on the memorial of his passing, January 22nd, 2017, as a way to create a new platform, connect with an audience, grow a new one. This is kind of, on the cusp of, all the social media stuff. It was and still is the greatest way that I have found for me to continue to heal. Because every single time I sit down for an interview like this, or for my show, or do anything related to EF, and my brother as well, he runs Everforward Apparel, it's that intention. It's that immediate reminder of, we are doing this because of what we went through. We are doing this for the legacy of our father. We were doing this for us. And it was just wild to see how well and quickly it was accepted. It could have just been somebody created a brand or a business, and just, hopefully you market it right and people interpret its meaning the way that you want it. But just since, and my brother introduced the brand first, Everforward Apparel. And once I saw how well it was accepted, and just how quickly people were connecting to us, of like, I've lost a father, I've lost someone, or this isn't just a brand, this isn't just a t-shirt, this is something that has a lot of meaning to it. Like we can connect to that. There's a humanization component. And I picked up on that pretty quickly. And I picked up on that pretty quickly, and I realized that it has to be more. It has to be more. And my skill set at the time was talking. My skill set at the time is the human body. My skill set is understanding the physicality, but also the mental, emotional aspects of this all. And so what better way for me to pick it up and to give my part and to contribute to this new mission through the podcast, because that was the platform, excuse me, that was contributing so much to my life at the time and my personal growth. And I would listen to them on my way into work, and I would have just the best, most immediate resources to help my clients in their health and their wellness. And so I just latched on. And when I introduced it to the world on that date, it really was almost like another rebirth for me, because I am now here publicly creating something and giving something that is the content and stuff is familiar already for my audience. And it's not a wild, crazy thing for anybody to launch a podcast, but just for me to do it with that name and for me to do it with that meaning, and for me to do it so that every time I have a conversation with somebody on that show, I am revisiting that experience in my life. It was the most necessary thing I could have ever done for my mental health, I think. And it has continued to allow me to grow and to heal, but damn sure to learn this, new version of a man that I've become. I am letting go of the soldier Chase. I'm letting go of the health coach Chase. I am stepping into this new version and picking up the torch, and finally really understanding my own identity and mapping out my own path.
You mentioned on one of the podcasts, Chase, that it's not about finding someone that's a million steps in front of you trying to catch up. You need to find someone who's a step or two ahead of you and try to use them as a mentor and a guide. I think you're probably more than a step or two ahead of us right now, maybe three or four, but I'm using you as an example, as a mentor for me and for my brother Anthony, to help us become the best versions of ourselves as podcast hosts as well. We did it a little bit differently. I mentioned when we first got to know each other, you did a lot of time doing the research, understanding what equipment you needed, the best way to interview a guest, and you spent months and months doing the research, creating that knowledge quilt. We jumped off and we're like, all right, hopefully there's a parachute that works here, because we didn't know what the fuck we were doing, and we're definitely learning along the way. I'll wrap that back into Chase. And one, I just listening to a lot of the podcasts, the journey that you've gone on, and the way that it looks, it sounds, it feels. It's well done. It's a polished, professional. I love listening to it. I can't wait. And I just, I want the
don't go back to year one. It's going to be totally different, and it's going to ruin the effect for you.
Yeah, it's funny. I listened to the first podcast that I did solo, and then that me and my brother did together. And
it was a train wreck. Yeah, it was tough to listen to.
It was so. Just to bring some closure on this experience that we've had together, you mentioned at the beginning, and we talked a little bit about masculinity and that role that your father played back in school. So I was like, what did you learn about being a man from your father and from school, and what was the lesson? And you shared a lot about that. From that point, when your father passed until now, how has your definition of masculinity changed? I mean, you think about the pendulum swing from that stoic, hard-ass version of, basically our dads were, and our fathers and their fathers. And then it came all the way in the other direction where men aren't men anymore, and I'm trying to help young men and even men that are our age and older understand what masculinity means. So as you've developed your own definition of yourself, your identity, and your thoughts on masculinity, where do you sit right now? How would you define masculinity in your own words?
Love that question. I think for me, and I feel like personally, I've just had so many lives. I've lived so many lives of the typical masculine, the untypical masculine, the typical human being. I've grown up in a very small town. I went to a public school, private school. I've been in the Army. I've been all over the world. I'm a brother, a husband, a son. I've worked 9 to 5s. I've bussed tables. I've been a coffee barista. I've, owned my own businesses, and I've gone from living in a double wide on 162 acres to living in the heart of one of the most booming cities in the world, here in Los Angeles, California. And it still blows my mind. I don't think a lot of this is real. But what I'll say to that is the masculine for me is recognizing that there is a lot innate in us as men, just physiologically, biochemically, hormonally. And there are a lot of versions that we perhaps have lived, a lot of versions that we perhaps want to live, and there are other versions that others think we should live. And not one of them is right or wrong, but I do think they're all worth exploring, because a man, for me, knows what his truth is. And that is definitely something, an example that my father set before me of no matter what you do, if you show up when you're supposed to show up, more importantly, when you say you're going to show up, even if that's just for yourself, do what you say you're going to do. Leave it all out there, no matter by what exterior standard they deem good, bad, ugly, pretty, pass, fail, success, bomb, whatever. No one will be able to really define that except for you. And if you can look at yourself in the mirror after the fact and know that you gave it your all, that you succeeded, and or you got a great learning experience of what to do or what not to do afterwards, you create and take your truth from that experience. And there may come a time when you need to tap back into one of those. There may be a time when you need to reach down deep into your balls, grab your weapon, and, man up, ruck up, be that soldier version, be that warrior, kind of this archetype that I love to consider in masculinity, aside from kind of these various truths that we all live, is king, warrior, magician, lover, this old male archetype. And I think ultimately we all should be striving for the king archetype. And it's just this cool, calm, and collected guy who is all of those things, but he only chooses to tap into them when absolutely necessary, but necessary for him, his immediate family, his community. There is no self along the way. It's knowing that you have all these truths, all these tools inside of you and access to them, or the ability to explore them. But you are not them, and they should not be you, and they should not define you, and that should not be it for the entirety of the rest of your life. It's knowing that all these things are there, and that you are brave enough and confident enough and scared enough to explore them all, so that you know what you need to call upon and when. Knowing your truth and knowing that, I think, is the greatest way a man could ever live.
That's as close to a comprehensive definition as I've
Were you writing that down? Because that's
that was beautiful. That was absolute beauty in words right there, Chase. So,
thank you.
Where can the Building Men audience find you, Chase Chewning? How can we get in touch with you? How can we follow along on your journey?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be in one of three places. One is probably your local LA coffee house, getting stemmed out of my mind every morning. Or I'm going to be on my show, Ever Forward Radio. We're everywhere. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, put them up on YouTube as well, or Instagram. You can find me at Chase_Chewning. And if you enjoyed what I talk about here today, you're definitely going to find value in the podcast. My three main pillars are fitness, nutrition, mindset. But my Instagram is really, it's that continuous journey for me. I'm posting things, storing things, sharing things of what I'm experiencing, what works for me, what doesn't. And it's all things human optimization, really. I don't adopt to one philosophy, one modality, one diet, one training protocol, one whatever. We are multifaceted beings, and this life is multifaceted, and there's a lot to try out there. And I'm no holds barred. You're going to see everything that's adding value to my life or that I'm questioning. That's for sure. Even
recently on Instagram, I've noticed some of the it's just a video of you, and the words are coming up, but it's just your train of thought, whatever is going on in your mind at that time. And I find a lot of value in following along on your journey on Instagram as well. It's really well done.
Appreciate that, man. Thank you.
And I've learned a lot during the last hour or so from you and your journey. I know the Building Men audience will as well. Everything that Chase just talked about, I will certainly put in the show notes. So this way, if you're interested in following along on your journey, which I would highly recommend anyone listening to this, you will get enormous value from this remarkable human being that was on the show today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Chase Chewning, thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.
Absolutely. Anthony, any final words, my friend?
No, thank you, man. I just appreciate talking with you. This was great. Great experience. Always a good time.
Building Men, go a step further than you thought you can go today. We'll see you next time. Building Men.